Hello, how are you? My name is Federico. I am CEO at Kleros. I'm super happy to be here again, another year after, well, very hard 2020. And we're going to speak about free speech. And we will start our story on January 6th of 2020. Jack Dorsey was on his vacations in a paradise island in Polynesia, French Polynesia, and he gets a call he didn't want to get. And it's his team from the US who are saying, look, Trump is out of control. He's tweeting, people are taking over the Capitol, and he's calling for violence. What do we do? So after all of this, discussions they have with the team, well, they decide to cancel Trump's account from Twitter, which, as you can imagine, produced a very, very big scandal. Of course, President Trump was less than thrilled about this thing. And it also produced very important repercussions in the academia, for example. Lots of professors saying, look, these companies have so much power over who can speak and who can't. Trump was deplatformed, but by the basically a private company. If you want to read more about how this happened and all these internal negotiations that happened at Twitter and with the government regarding the deplatform of Trump, I can recommend this very good article at the New York Times, which explains, almost minute by minute how the decision was made. When social media platforms were created in the mid-2000s, they were trying to see how to maximize the amount of users, how to acquire people, how to give a good service, right? No one thought about governance and free speech back then. That was not at all a priority. That only came as an afterthought, especially when these platforms became very, very big. And some people started to become worried about the impact that they could have on democracy and on who can have access to speech, right? In a time where most people get their news from their social media feeds. I recommend very much this movie about Brexit with Benedict Cumberbatch, that how they made the Brexit, the exit option win, with, of course, social media manipulation. The big tech companies are, of course, aware of the problem, and they don't want to be in this position of having to decide who gets to speak and who doesn't. It's a problem for them. And so a very interesting initiative happened at Facebook, which is trying to build a Supreme Court. This guy you see there is Noah Feldman. He's a lawyer from Harvard, and he's the brain behind the Supreme Court at Facebook. And so this is the story. So Noah Feldman went to college with Sheryl Sandberg. Do you guys know who Sheryl Sandberg is? So Sheryl Sandberg is the COO at Facebook. So she's one of the most powerful women in tech, or persons in tech, basically. And he was staying at her house in 2018, and they were discussing the problems that they have at Facebook with moderation, basically. And, on a bike ride on the Menlo Park Mountains, he came up with the idea, he had this idea, okay, but Facebook needs a Supreme Court, right? So he pitched this to the Facebook executive team. They didn't seem very interested at first, but then at a moment in the meeting, Zuckerberg says this. He says, we need this because I spend lots of my time making individual decisions about individual posts that should or not get removed from the platform, right? Zuckerberg had to be deciding what to accept and what not in Facebook. So, and this guy was the guy who pushed the creation of this Supreme Court. Interestingly, he's a professor of law with an experience. Who wrote a book about Madison. Madison was one of the founding fathers who wrote the institutional building of the US at the time of the Constitution. Madison was one of the people that were involved. So this is a guy who knows a lot about constitutional design, and he also collaborated in the Iraq constitution a couple of years ago. So they select, Facebook designates a number of people who are going to be part of the Supreme Court. And one day, Zuckerberg gets a call from Trump. I cannot make a good Trump, but he says something like, look, Mark, I'm not very happy about the court, about the people in the court. I think that this is not going to be fair, this is going to be biased towards liberal values, well, you can imagine. And especially, I'm not very happy about this woman, Pamela Karlan. She's a Stanford professor, and she was one of the people who gave her testimony during one of the Trump impeachments, right? So imagine, like, this high level, the President of the United States calls the CEO of Facebook to try to influence how this Supreme Court is going to be formed. This sounds a lot like, when the President of the US has to nominate a Supreme Court justice, that this is the type of negotiation they have, right? But this was happening all in private and behind the scenes. So, okay, they have the court. So what kind of decisions they make? Let me show you a bit of what they work on there. So one of the posts they had to work on, so this post was removed from Facebook, that it was appealed and then got to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has the right to overrule, so it's the final decision making, right? So it's more powerful than Zuckerberg in decisions about content. So there was this post that was removed for violating hate speech rules, right? Which bans attacks based on sex and gender. But what do you think? Should this post be accepted or rejected from the platform? It's no. Who thinks it should be accepted? Who thinks it should be removed? Okay, good. What do you think they decided? Who thinks they accepted the post? Yeah, it was accepted. Because the point was that, okay, this could be seen as, hate speech, but it was also a humoristic, situation, and they accepted this because they saw it under the light of this is humor, right? Of course, it's debatable, but that's what the decision that was made. Then there was a guy who posted a post of this French doctor, Didier Raoul, who has this theory about hydrochloroquine. He posted this into a forum, French forum of COVID, and was removed. And then this case goes to the Supreme Court of Facebook, and who thinks this should be accepted? Okay. Who thinks this should not be accepted? Okay, this is more. So the point here was, well, if you start banning divergent opinions, so then this will be bad for science progress. And the decision of the Facebook court was that they accepted the post, but they suggested adding some little warning that this is not the officially held view of the medical community, right? And one more. There were, as you can remember, some Black Lives Matter protests in Minneapolis. Trump makes a post which has some, reference to a governor from the south of the United States called George Wallace that says, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. So that was seen by a number of people as a racist remark. And what do you think? Should this post be accepted or not? Who thinks it should be accepted? Who thinks it should be rejected? Okay, so now we have more people saying that it should be rejected. Well, what happened in this case is that they didn't make a decision on this one. The court is still not operational, they said. Which was a very bad thing for Zuckerberg internally. It created a lot of resentment from his team. And in particular, because Jack Dorsey made a different decision. They still left the post online, but they added that this was an infringement to the violence, not glorifying violence rule, right? So this is how the current stage of content moderation, as Balaji mentioned, social networks as we have them now, they don't really have dispute resolution. They are just trying to see how they do this. The Supreme Court of Facebook is not a bad thing. Of course, it's a step in the right direction. The big question that we will have in the years to come is how can we moderate all this content? And this should be done in two ways, right? Efficiently, like cheap, and transparently, like it should be made in a fair way. I have something for you. Well, I'm going to tell you a bit about Kleros. That we typically pitch Kleros in the context of, escrow transactions, like this woman hires this guy to make like a website, and then she puts the money into an escrow, and then they agree if there is a dispute in this situation. There's going to be an arbitrator called Kleros. The dispute starts, jurors are drawn randomly, these guys make a decision, and this is the interface that the jurors use for the dispute. And they vote that she's right, the money is sent to her from the escrow, and well, that basically ends the situation. And all this system is based on a token called PNK, which comes from the token, the ID token, the ancient Greek used for the drawing, the jurors in trials, in the ancient Athenian trials. And the basic logic is that people who try to gain the system are going to lose money, and people who are honest and vote, take the time to analyze evidence and vote correctly, they make money on average. So this is the Kleros in a nutshell. But Kleros is way much more than just the escrow type of dispute. There are many use cases, and one of them is, as you can imagine, social media moderation. And for this, let me just introduce a bit a use case of Kleros, which is used to resolve disputes in the context of oracles, right? As you know, we have prediction markets. Prediction markets, in order to trigger payments, they need some information from the real world, and the real world needs to, well, send this information, and this should be secure, right? So most of the times, the oracle works as expected and no problem, but sometimes what happens is that, it's not clear if the thing that happened in the real world should trigger the payment in one way or the other into the prediction market, right? And in this situation, you can have a dispute, right, where Kleros is going to decide which way to make the payments. So this case goes to Kleros. Kleros jurors analyze the evidence, and then after they analyze the evidence, they vote. In this case, they vote for A, and this is sent to the prediction market, and then this resolves the case, right? We have some experience in very high, level disputes happening in prediction markets connected to Omen. There was a dispute about a prediction market that said, will there be a day with at least 1,000 reported corona deaths in the US in the first 14 days of July? So some sources said that there were more than 1,000, others said that there were less. So what was the right decision? Well, that was a dispute, and Kleros had to solve it. And the jurors ruled that it was yes. And then another one is this one. Will Joe Biden win the 2020 US presidential election? Well, anyone would have thought that this had a simple solution at the moment of making the market, but, well, as you know, the election was disputed by Trump, and then the Electoral College only would have to make their decision after the date on which the market should clear. So there was an argument that was made by some people that at that moment, well, no one had won the election, so the market should be declared invalid, right? So the jurors didn't buy this, and the decision that was made was that effectively Biden had won, and well, that cleared the market. There lot of money at stake here, $2.5 million locked into the contract that were going to be distributed one way or the other depending on Kleros ruling, right? So this introduction is for you to see a bit how Kleros works in these subjective cases. And now I'm going to present a framework for using Kleros in the social media context, which is not mine. I wish I was smart enough to develop this, but this is a framework that was proposed by Vitalik. I just made some adaptations and introduced Kleros into this framework. And I really recommend that you read this excellent post. And this is how it works. Let's imagine there is a social media platform already decentralized, and a user has to makes a post and make a deposit, takes some money with this post that he made, and then other users can review this post and they can upvote it or downvote it. Like an upvote means it's like a bet on. I think that if this post went to the bureau solution at Kleros would rule that it's a valid post. And downvote means if I vote that this post, if it went to the bureau solution, the moderator would say it's not valid, right? So you have people who can vote up or down, and then this is how it look like, for example, in a interface, imagine an impersonation of Elon Musk, so people could flag it with this system, or spam, for example, as well could be flagged with a system like this one. And then most of the times, maybe nothing happens. The money is sent back to the users, and Kleros doesn't participate. But sometimes, maybe because a post got lots of downvotes or lots of traction for some reason, it is actually sent to the arbitrator, right? And in this case, Kleros is going to, of course, as you know, analyze the content. It's going to analyze the post and compare this to the rules, and then make a decision. In this case, let's say that the post is rejected, and so the people who downvoted it and who were coherent with the Kleros decision get the ETH that was locked into this post, right? So this is a simple mechanism that Vitalik proposed, and where I introduced Kleros into it. And the question that we have now is that, okay, does this comply with the two main conditions that we want? Is this efficient, or is this transparent? About efficiency, Facebook has immense economies of scale because they have so much content to moderate that they can do it at a very, very cheap price. Estimates are that they may be paying as low as 10 cents per moderation event. If you want to learn a bit more on how this is actually done, I recommend this article from The Verge. So you see what is the life of the actual moderators who work at Facebook contact centers under very strict NDAs. And they, imagine looking at all the fields of the internet for 8 hours a day. It's not great. And of course, they make lots of mistakes, right, in this process. Look, as high as 300,000 mistakes every day. So some estimates we have done at Kleros about how efficient would this be say that this would cost between $3 and $5 per moderation event, which of course is not ideal. And this also is assuming that we are already on Ethereum 2.0 or layer 2, right? So still at the moment, it's really expensive to moderate content with a system like this. But also, an important thing to have in mind is that maybe we can tweak the system so not that many decisions have to be made by actually Kleros, and a lot of the problems can be solved by the prediction market itself. So maybe the amount of actual disputes that need to be solved is not that high, and this would drive down the costs. So that's something that we need to evaluate more. And I imagine the future of content moderation to be a combination of technologies. for the most objective kind of problems, like fake account and spam, maybe lots of this can be done through, on-chain methods. I can imagine the proof of humanity also can be, I see here Santi. So yeah, I imagine, and this can be a great way to, detect, fake accounts. One of the main problems that Facebook has is detecting bots who open accounts. And when you start moving to the more, subjective human aspects, I imagine that that's where Kleros would be more important, because that's harder to resolve with like purely automated methods, right? And the other big thing here is transparency, because this is a government, and so you need transparency in the way in which this process is going to work. For this, when I was researching, I came back to this gentleman that I had studied back then in my days when I was a philosophy student. Jeremy Bentham was a moral philosopher from the UK, late 18th century, early 19th century. He's mostly known because he created this moral philosophy, moral theory of utilitarianism. But he was a really progressive guy back then. He advocated for equal rights for women, abolition of slavery, abolition of capital punishment, and freedom of speech and press. All this in the 18th century. What we are interested in here is a book he writes in 1791 in the context of a reform that was underway in the British penitentiary system. As you know, he was advocating, the abolition of capital punishment, and this required making better prisons to hold more people, and this had to be done with an efficient way, and in such a way that there was accountability of what was done in the prison, right? For all of you who like Greek, well, Panopticon is all-seeing, pan everything, or opticon see. And the prison was basically an architectural device which had like this shape. This is his own croquis. And it was like a tower in the middle with a guard, and then prisoners in the cells. And the guard can see everyone from the tower, and there is a light, and prisoners cannot see if there's someone in the tower or not. Since they don't know if they are being watched, they have to behave as if they were being watched all the time, right? So this accomplished the goal of the system being very inexpensive, right? Because you could even run it without any guards, maybe. Bentham never convinced the UK government to build a Panopticon prison, but 100 Panopticon prisons were built in different places of the world. This one is in Cuba. Fidel Castro was in prison here when he was in the middle of the revolution. So it's abandoned, as you see. So Bentham has this idea of the Panopticon in the 19th century, or late 18th century. But people tend to know the Panopticon not because of Bentham, but because of this other guy, who is a French philosopher called Michel Foucault, who used to live not very far from where we are now. And he publishes this book, Surveiller et Punir, which is like Discipline and Punish. In this book, he reviews the history of prisons, and he speaks about, the Bentham Panopticon in a way like this, He says, this is not really about, a prison. This is about society. What Bentham is saying is how the society of discipline is structured, like with individuals being watched at all times by, the disciplinary society, with the goal of making individuals who are docile and who fit into the industrial system of the 20th century. Of course, you can make all the extensions of that you want, because this is very obviously what is happening in digital surveillance. Of course, what Foucault didn't mention that much, or didn't insist in, is that the idea of the Panopticon at Bentham was not like Facebook. It was actually, he had the idea that the prison itself had to be open. So what's the problem with the Facebook Supreme Court? It's great. They are trying to solve a problem in a more decentralized way. But in the end, how can you have credible neutrality here? In the end, when the hard decisions have to be made, you always tend to get, these phone calls at very late in the night. So this is going to be, at the end, political negotiations between, high-level actors, and the decision is going to be made within a black box, right? The original Panopticon that Bentham devised, under the Tower of the Guards, you had a place where every citizen was allowed to enter, and they could watch the guards at all times. So they could see how this surveillance was being made, right? And this is a very famous quote by the Panopticon book. And the doors of all public establishments ought to be thrown wide open to the body of the curious at large, the great open committee of the tribunal of the world. So he had this idea of the public opinion as the great tribunal, and this is how he wanted the prison to be built. So this is exactly how content moderation should be built in order to comply with this condition of credible neutrality and transparency. It needs to be open. So, of course, when Facebook made their platform, there were no DAOs, right? So the future of the free speech in the decentralized age, of course, needs to be built on a DAO. Of course, we hope that this is going to be built on decentralized social media platforms. Of course, we expect this to be, at some point, using some automated tools, right? Open source algorithms that people understand and we know how they use, and they don't have these horrible biases that sometimes have. And the idea of the moderation DAO. Under the mechanics that we discussed here, that we took from the Vitalik's post, or other mechanics. I don't know, maybe this is not the best way to do it, so there might be others. So if you are interested in building this, also I have a little announcement. We are at Kleros building an incubator for people who want to, construct, apps who are connected to Kleros ecosystem and that bring cases to the Kleros court. So if this would be a great idea for any of you to join the incubator, you can start applying now if you want, and build this, and this is going to be a great thing for the future of free speech on the internet. So more details on that later. Thank you very much, guys. Great. Well, any questions?
Hello. I'm just wondering, what's the performance like for using this? Is it something you can deploy in systems and have a reliable result on a conflict resolution attempt in a reasonable amount of time?
Doing this at Kleros should take, a case of content moderation should take a few days, maybe a week. So it's fast, at least fast compared to most moderation done in centralized platforms.
Will you focusing on more free speech related or economic related problems than criminal or penalty problems?
I didn't understand the last word.
Will you focus more on economics or free speech related than criminal or
criminal? No, we're not focusing in criminal, of course, cases. It's not. I mean, I imagine this system in the short term, at least, at least working well for spam detection and impersonation and that kind of more like easy, and then going forward. The Kleros court has proved to be extremely good at handling even quite hard cases. You know, the case about Trump and the prediction market, Biden versus Trump, you know, there were like very sophisticated constitutional arguments done by both parties. So, yeah, I imagine starting by something more simple, but it could scale up to more, interesting questions.
Yep. Hello.
Yeah.
In the back.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah. It looks like your product might be a good use case to plug into the Ethereum attestation service. Have you taken a look at it? They just announced it today in one of the other talks.
No. What's the name?
Ethereum attestation service.
No, but that sounds like a very compatible name to Kleros. I had to check that.
Yeah. It's a open base layer protocol for attestations on Ethereum to all talk to each other. Just wondering if you guys were using it, but looks interesting. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for the suggestion.
Hi. Hello. Hey. I was just wondering, how do you plan to onboard more jurors who obviously need Panopticon tokens, but right now, and probably for the foreseeable future, gas prices will be pretty high to buy on DEXs, and for maybe institutions or people who want to be selected a lot more often for jurorship, they'll need an exchange with decent liquidity. So I was wondering how you plan to onboard more jurors. So for example, in the Trump case, it was not possible to appeal the case after one round because there was already 500 jurors or so selected.
I think that for this case to work, actually, as I mentioned, we need like Ethereum to scale a bit more because content moderation is a high volume, low value type of cases, right? So it wouldn't be feasible at this moment, but you know, we're building stuff for the future. So like not now, but in 1 year, we're going to have more layer 2, hopefully more development towards Ethereum 2.0. So that's the time frame we're thinking for this roadmap. But yeah, of course now it will be very expensive to do.
Thank you.
Actually, I didn't even see who saw it because I have the slide.
Well, thanks a lot for the presentation. Oh, I'm here.
Who's speaking? Oh.
No, I was just wondering, how will you be selecting and identifying the jurors?
Anyone who has the token and stakes the token, let's say, into the social media moderation court, is eligible as a juror in cases happening in that court. So that's how the mechanics work.
KYC?
No.
Okay.
Okay, guys, thank you very much.